Welcome to Chaos2Cured podcast. You're here with Jeffrey Freed and Kirk Patrick Miller. Today, we're going to talk about dyslexia. I have a couple things just that are fun to share, but this is really, Jeffrey, you wanted to kind of bring up what you think it is and that people are kind of missing some things. And that's what this show is about, is kind of bringing the stuff out into the light so we can talk about it. So go for it. Why don't you start us off?
Sure. Virtually everyone I work with who is, again, I specialize in working with people on the spectrum who are virtually all right hemisphere dominant learners. They think in pictures, they see things in 3 dimensions, and they have a lot of sensory things going on because their senses are heightened because that's one of the ways they pick up information about the world. And what I'd like to say about dyslexia is it is so much different than what most people think it is. Most people just think it's a tendency, it's a reading disorder, they think. And it needs to, and the way it needs to be remediated is through phonics and drill and teaching the person to sequence sounds. And it's generally a brutal experience for the poor person that has dyslexia, because
Jeffrey, would you
dyslexia
would you explain to all the people that are listening, and I hated to cut you off because what you were saying was so vital, would you explain to everybody that might not know what dyslexia is in terms of okay.
So dyslexia is a visual spatial view of the world, and when the person is young, everything they see, they rotate. They can flip and rotate things in their mind's eye. They see things 3-dimensionally. When they learn how to read, they don't really read the words. They kind of look at the pictures and make up their own story. And when they do read, they have a tendency to flip letters as well. So a W can look like an M, a B can look like a D, an A can look like an N, a U can look like an N. And so reading is really hard when you're flipping and rotating letters. However, you have a huge array of strengths. And the strengths are you can see things from 3D, you can flip and rotate ideas in your head, you can hold mental images for a long period of time because you think in pictures and you're almost always smart. One of the definitions about dyslexia that I read many years ago was that people who manifest dyslexia have at least an average or most likely an above average intelligence. I'd say above average because how do you measure the IQ of someone who flips and rotates stuff on a standardized test? They generally, you can generally see it when you see little children who are bright and precocious, but they're not interested in reading the words when you're trying to teach them how to read. It is so hard to get them to pay attention to the words because, after all, they think in images. And images, that's pretty much what they're interested in. As you get older, dyslexics, like most visual spatial people, have trouble retrieving information rapidly. And here's why. When a dyslexic person is trying to read or to answer a question, the thoughts come to them as an image, and it's probably a 3D image. So what they have to do to translate it to words is they have to take their time and allow processing time, turn it into words. If they write, they've got to spell it and punctuate it, which is difficult. It's just more complex a process than a more linear sequential reader who can, or an answer to a question, who basically thinks in words and images, but mostly in words. Theirs is the bailiwick of reading and writing and basically words. It can be simplified by saying that the neurotypical person thinks a lot in words, maybe almost all in words. So the world or in the arena of words, they are stars. The dyslexic person thinks in images. And when you're learning how to read, spell, answer questions, learn directionality, it takes a while. And most of them get shamed. And when they get shamed, they just think they're dumb. That's what a little kid thinks. They go to school, they're 7 years old, they can't read, everyone else can read. And the only possible option to the little child is, I must be stupid, what's wrong with me? And teachers generally don't really understand what's going on either. But from my experience of working with so many people, most of whom have some element of dyslexia, is they're not wired to really read until an average age of 7 to 8. It's the magical year when they sort of figure stuff out and learn how to read, but they don't learn the way linear sequential people read. They basically memorize the words, because that's what's so interesting about people with dyslexia. They have almost always have wonderful visual memories, but they flip things. And one of the things I've been at war with probably my entire career is trying to teach people with dyslexia to read phonetically. It is an exercise in torture. Sometimes they can do it, and most people don't know any other way to teach reading. I use a different approach. I use sight words. I try to get to the person before they can make a mistake, because if you're dyslexic and you're learning how to read, and you look at a word like was, and you read it as saw, and then someone steps in and corrects you, I'm sorry, you're going to read it incorrectly for a long, long time. So they have to unlearn the things that they say when they initially try to decode words. So I may read the passage for them, and have them read it after me, or pick big words and get them into their mental vocabulary. But it's different. And the thing that I really want to stress about dyslexia, it's not a learning disability. It is a style. And if they have any self-esteem left after school beats the living hell out of them, what happens is they can be incredibly gifted later on in life. They're like people on the spectrum. They are late bloomers, classic late bloomers. Your kid may be gifted and brilliant, but they're not, if they're dyslexic, they're not going to read at age 4 or age 5. There are exceptions, but that's generally the rule.
You
And
know,
there are some school systems who get it. I remember the Waldorf schools don't even teach reading until 7 or 8. And I've heard of a bunch of other experimental schools that don't either. And that means they avoid shaming. If your child has dyslexia, they will read. They're just going to read later. If the dyslexia is really severe, where they flip and rotate everything, it's going to be later than 7 or 8, but they will read. If taught kind of in the fashion that I just mentioned, I guarantee they'll read. But that's the fear, the general philosophy about working with learning differences or learning disabilities. They call it learning disabilities. You got to get to it early.
yeah.
This is one you don't.
Well, it's if you look it up, of course, it's going to come up as learning disability and a neurological condition where it affects how people learn. And I think for me, I relate to words. So it's interesting because you mentioned the visual spatial part and being able to flip things, and those are things I was always very, very good at, and I loved them. Those are fun tests to do. And again, I think we may have mentioned it before, but people can look it up. It's called the Apple test or the Apple image test. And you close your eyes and you imagine what an apple looks like. And most people have like different, and I think on Twitter, they were like, or you can look it up on Google or whatever you use. And the image is like of 6 different kinds of apples. And the 6th version is there's nothing. You don't picture anything. And so since I am so great visually, so I'm a painter, I love to draw, I do everything visually. I close my eyes, I picture an apple, somebody says it, I can't see it. I can't see it at all. Now, if I start trying to describe it while my eyes are closed, all of a sudden the image starts appearing. Again, it's very, very latent and it's very faded. It's not like any of the other pictures. So I still can't technically picture it, but the words for me, I think help. So the dyslexia, the whole idea of that one, I would miss entire paragraphs. I wouldn't ever switch things. I would fade in and out, and that was more due to the ADHD or whatever else. But I do know one of the most brilliant doctors that I worked with, and he actually was the person that worked with me on my memoir. He was dyslexic, so he made it through medical school with dyslexia. He memorized everything, and because of that, he just was phenomenal. And he was very well versed. So he never stopped learning. He was kind of definitely his life was his job. So I liked what you said. A lot of the parents, and I know individuals that I've worked with that do. So I know that they sometimes feel like they have failed or that they won't get there. I liked what you said, Jeffrey, and I wanted to make sure I brought up a great example. Something that I have found specifically with people that, and I've brought up with the parents before, and I said, do you think they might have, or have they ever been analyzed for having dyslexia? Because the direction, especially when I was teaching violin, the down bow versus an up bow, they would get very confused with that. And again, these were very, very bright individuals. So
Yeah,
this is,
let me throw something in that I would have missed had you not said that. And it's a key component of dyslexia. Dyslexic individuals get disoriented a lot. And that's one of the keystones of dyslexia. Imagine a mind that thinks, it daydreams beautifully and graphically. A person who really has dyslexia, what happens is their daydreams are so vivid that they oftentimes get them confused with what we call reality. And then so many dyslexic individuals have described to me that they're in a daydream, they're trying to focus on the teacher or what's being taught or the lecture. And what happens is they start to daydream and they get lost in it. And then all of a sudden they sort of come to and realize, uh-oh, I should have been listening. And they get very disoriented. And the disorientation feeling is kind of like been described as like a feeling of nausea, or being woken up from a deep sleep. And it can happen to people with dyslexia many times a day, and it's very disconcerting. But you look at it the other way, they are very, very good daydreamers. They think outside the box because they can view the box from many perspectives, so they can come up with some really unusually powerful, good ideas. And because this style is associated with high intelligence, you take high intelligence and the ability to see things out of the ordinary from perspectives, you can have some really wonderful innovative ideas. And that's indeed true. Being dyslexic, when sort of get it together, I mean, you have a huge advantage in a world that is 3D graphics. computer-based, the software-based, information-based, big problems. I mean, I'd hire, if I were an employer, I'd hire the dyslexic on a heartbeat over the linear learner. And they're needed now. People who think outside the box are needed. The real sad part is the school system just still thinks, I mean, this has been 50 years of this now for me, watching this. The school system does pay lip service to teaching different learning styles, but they don't really know what they're talking about. They don't really know that visual learners, for example, and that's dyslexic people, don't have to learn everything by seeing it. They can take auditory information and just visualize it as long as the conditions are right. That's the key thing to remember in all of this is it's not so much how you intake the information, it's how you store it. And storing it is what matters, and how you retrieve it. And so, you don't have to teach dyslexic individuals entirely visually. You can just tell them, hey, I want to be talking for a while, but I want you to make a picture out of it. And they do. If the conditions aren't good for intaking information, they won't be able to visualize it. But I teach all the folks I work with, if you can't visualize it, you have no other way to retrieve it. So record it so you can listen to it later and visualize, or just say to the teacher, I was unable to visualize the lecture. Could you give it to me one-on-one? Most teachers will respond favorably to that because the person is showing initiative. And
Yes.
And that's, I mean, I've never heard a teacher saying no. So
no, most especially if the student shows like a true interest, and oftentimes an email is a nice way to go. I know that the teachers are so bombarded, and everybody's what's in my viewpoint, what I've seen is we have, and this is going to go kind of, I'll bounce this back to you, but as you said, if you were hiring somebody, the first person you'd choose would be someone that can see some of these complex patterns, which we see with people with dyslexia. And there is, I know there's lots of evidence for people on the spectrum being phenomenal at being able to reimagine a new process. So there's stuff like that. There's people bipolar. Again, the whole message is what we want to do is figure out, of course, how can we get all these people, first of all, to function. And by that, I don't mean that as an insult. The world we have, the business world, it's built on timetables. It's built on spreadsheets. It's built on analyzing revenue to predict future profits. It's stuff that is definitely linear and sequential. It's not visual spatial. So I think the whole world, in a lot of ways, business-wise, is very difficult to adapt. And the issue that I'm seeing too is that all of the fields that are really booming require that and need that type of mind. So we're seeing this weird, I think, changing of the guard. I'm trying to think of a good term. I can't think of something good. We're seeing a big shift in business overall because they're having a problem, because these amazing thinkers and problem solvers that they want and that do really well with, say, AI and large language models, that kind of, I mean, massive complex problems that take kind of imagination to solve. That's what is needed. But the problem is those individuals are not good at staying on a schedule, task-based, following step A to step B to step C, which is how the business model need, or is it at least run in the past? One reason that, if you watch just the evolution of things changing in the business world, you see some of this, and we're seeing it also even at the educational system. There's some patterns that are just breaking down, and it's making it harder to see, again, first of all, for them to succeed. And I do think the stigma is extremely huge, because a lot of these individuals, that get a 504, get picked on for being stupid or special needs child. I don't like the word special needs because it's been kind of changed. And what it is they don't need something special. They are like very unique. So you have these brilliant candles that honestly literally just need a little bit of growth in a different way. It's not, I mean, we're all so different. It's amazing how picked on people get for some of this stuff. So the stigma, what they can become. And I think honestly, what we need are those people. And to be completely honest, if you look at what's happened with everything this year and where warfare is going, where business is going, people are being less and less involved with each other. People are slowly, and do you think we're going to see, actually, I'll throw this out. I don't know. I haven't searched this up, but I should. Are there more dyslexic diagnoses? I know autism has spiked dramatically. Bipolar has as well. Is dyslexia?
I can give my take on that. Dyslexia has always been there. It's always been there, probably at about a 15 to 25%, rate in cultures, but it's becoming more common, and there's lots of reasons for that. It may be that developmentally, it's a really good thing to be dyslexic now because of the complex problems and the need for original thinking, and so we're responding with that. I don't know. It's epigenetics is what and it may very well be that this type of mind is a premium on it. But dyslexics are now, I've seen lots of statistics, probably 1 person in 3, but there are degrees of it. There are many people like myself who are mildly dyslexic. I can use the advantages, but the disadvantages are a pain too. But I know, when you're older, you get to figure out strategies around your weaknesses and you see the whole picture. But I'm fairly certain that it's because brains are so malleable, that what's happening is the culture is more 3-dimensional. It is more rapid fire, which does not favor dyslexia. Dyslexic individuals need time to process. The kind of speed stuff where you have a million choices and you're constantly bombarded, that promotes ADD. And dyslexia is mostly a condition where the person is so sensitive to the environment that they can't handle it, so they shut down involuntarily or voluntarily sometimes and pay attention to nothing. Or unless there's something that they're really interested in and they hyper focus. Dyslexic individuals have a lot of the sensory stuff that autistic people do, but it's not as intense. It doesn't cause them to shut down like it would with someone who's autistic. But they have this really interesting way of viewing the world. You can tell when they're a little kid, they love puzzles, they love mazes. And many times the parent thinks, my God, I've got a genius here. And they do, but then they start getting into the arena of words. And they won't look at the words, they'll look at the pictures or make up their own story. And the parents feel betrayed because their promising young child is daydreamy and mispronounces words and won't pay attention to words and doesn't know right from left. And they panic, and then the highly sensitive dyslexic kid will get really scared. What's wrong with me? I can read my parents, and they're projecting disappointment or alarm. Pick that right up and then shut down. So it's sort of the way I would summarize it and sort of finish talking about it would be dyslexia is probably very deeply genetic, and autism is quite genetic too, but there's no question in my mind that we're seeing more autism because of our horrible environment. I shouldn't use horrible, I'll use cacophonous environment. But I see dyslexia as more deeply rooted and less produced by the culture. That's my take.
No, it's really interesting. I just, I feel, as I dive in, with all of the things that I have that all have overlapping things, there's so many connections, and we've talked about that in the past. I know that as far as the depression or the sadness or the feelings of insecurity that come along with anything where you are singled out, and it's hard. It's not an easy thing. I didn't have to go through that in school, because really my bipolar was so prevalent. I was getting into trouble in such major ways. No one ever caught on to anything else, except the ADHD, because that was kind of, again, fairly obvious.
Yeah.
So, I didn't get, and also when I was growing up, it wasn't the same thing, but there were still labels, and especially with ADHD. And then the first moment where you have to take a pill, or where you have to go we have this bad, I'll end with this. We have a negative association with seeking help, and that's got to stop.
Really?
It's absurd. It's like, my first thought when I was told I had to go see like a psychologist was like, oh my God, what the heck is wrong with me? I'm going to, forgive my language. It was so huge. So I was like, oh my goodness, I'm broken. And those thoughts really are so minuscule, but the impact, what I would say is that a developing mind, that little ripple turns into a massive tidal wave. As time goes on, if it's not interrupted, if the waters are not stilled. I'll leave it with that. It's really important. You mentioned getting to it earlier and trying to recognize it, different ways of development,
that's all you need to do.
Yeah. Well, and I really liked what you said when you talked about learning the arena of words. I think that's a really nice way to state it, because I like the visual representation of arena, of kind of, you have this, objects and you have words. That to me works. And I can even separate it out into more things. And it shows, again, just because I'm more visual spatial does not mean I don't like sequential things. So, we should do a show on that later. I loved your thoughts on dyslexia. Please, for everyone that's listening, if you have some comments or questions, reach out. Please follow, subscribe, share all of the stuff, especially with somebody that you feel this show might help. And we will be back next week. So thank you so much for listening. Jeffrey, your insight onto this was so helpful. So thanks again.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for listening to Chaos2Cured podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with everyone you know, and definitely like, follow, and subscribe. Certainly leave a comment if you'd like. Let us know what you'd like us to talk about the next time. Also, in our show notes, there should be direct links where you can follow us on our social media, as well as reach out to us directly. Thanks again, and have a great day. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on Chaos2Cured podcast are the speaker's own. All discussion is based on our own experiences. We do not and cannot guarantee the accuracy or completeness of any information. Chaos2Cured podcast cannot give medical or health advice. All discussion is based upon our personal experiences and meant for general and educational purposes. This podcast is not a substitute for professional help or for diagnostic purposes for yourself or another. Chaos2Cured podcast always encourages you to consult an appropriate professional.